So welcome to the Node.js Next 10 meeting for November 27th, 2024. Probably have a few less people here because of the American Thanksgiving, but we will go through the agenda. So we'll go through the standard agenda for the issue that was generated in the repo. It was number 310. Before we start, anybody have any announcements or information they'd like to share? Okay, no announcements this week. I'm going to quickly go through the issues tagged for the agenda, and then I know that Jacob has one to add on as well. The ambassador program, we actually did talk about that last time in terms of the messages and additional topics that we'd like to work with the ambassadors to promote. I'd opened a PR, which landed in the repo that documented like where we would do that. And I think in the last one, we already brainstormed like the first messages we would PR in. So I think that's the next step because that PR landed. So nothing really new to discuss on that front, unless anybody else has something. This is messages to PR discussed last week. Okay, so I'm just taking the notes as we go. PR to doc. Okay, the following discussion survey from Perf and Diagnostics. I don't think we have anything new this week. The corporate node usage stories. It's like I think I'm like our discussion has been like that's sort of next on our list after we finish launching the ambassador program. And then building a sustainable and healthy collaborator base, Marco's working on some next steps based on the survey and collaborator summit. And the next steps from the advocacy deep dive, I think it's covered by the earlier issues. Okay, so that's our quick run through the issues that were on the agenda. So then I think, Jacob, I'll let you take.
Well, actually, let's have Zach go first because I think he has a meeting in like 20
sure,
minutes.
Okay, or Zach. Sure, yeah.
I think you're muted,
You're
Zach.
mute, yeah.
Yeah, sorry to jump ahead of everything. This is my first time on the call. Jacob had just let me know a few weeks back that you're potentially looking for someone to analyze, I think it was survey data.
Right, we did a couple of surveys, and so the data is available in, let me see, GitHub, Node.js, next 10 surveys, 2024. So in this repo, we've landed the survey data. Now that's sort of a massaged version of that. There's also like sorry, I'm gonna take a few notes here. So that's the massage version of the data, but there's also like a raw spreadsheet where we have some data in that. So I guess if you were able to take a look at that and you could make some recommendations in terms of like here's analysis that would make sense to like validate whether the data is valid or invalid or that kind of thing. Because I think we've gone through those results, done our sort of like interpretation, but haven't applied any mathematics or anything like that in terms of the survey, right?
Do you know off the top of your head just how large the sample size was? How many people completed the survey?
We had, I think it was 2,800 respondents. So that was the sample size. We didn't, I know we didn't do some traditional things like there were no questions to make sure people were real, for example. I know my son's has done some research, like studies and stuff like that, and some of the things he's mentioned in passing, and I know that that's the kind of thing you might do, but we didn't do that. I don't think we got really any results so that didn't look like they were real people.
Okay. No bot presence taking that.
Yeah. Yeah, like we didn't get any that really looked like they were totally like, well, wait a sec, what are they thinking here, right?
Like nothing, like just from preliminarily looking at it, that like they didn't finish the survey, didn't trail off towards the end, or like were there linked
Yeah,
questions?
that we may not have, and like that we didn't analyze to see like, hey, were there, because we ended up with like basically a spreadsheet with a whole bunch of answers. Some of them were like multiple choice, so that would have been easy for people to fill out. Some of them we asked more specific, like write-in questions, especially near the end. It was like, hey, have you had, what are your biggest pain points with Node, for example? I think may not have been that question, but something very similar to that. And so we didn't, those were all much lower responses than the other ones. So, and actually, even to go back further, we didn't analyze at all the questions together. What we ended up doing is like in that case, we would have sorted the Excel sheet to get the answers alphabetically, and that automatically removed like all the empty ones. So like that just said, okay, we got 50 people who filled in the write-in ones. Here's what they wrote in, and we didn't correlate that to any of their other answers, if you know what I mean. So you can see some of that, like in the survey results we did publish. The P, did we, have we actually got them all in there? Is there a pull request to add in? We had a PDF. I'm just seeing.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the file right now. I'm trying to find the main spreadsheet.
Yeah, I'm looking to see if we actually like we do have a maybe we haven't quite landed that yet. Oh no. Sorry, okay, I pointed you to the wrong one. That was a collaborator health survey. Let me this one. Yeah, okay. So this one is the right one because we did the collaborator survey was a much smaller one. This is the
right. Okay.
So that one in there is a right. Okay. So in there's a PDF that has like the Q3, what type of organization do you work with? And you can see the answers. And again, that's like just the sorted, filtered list. I mean, I think probably what we, for you to do anything more in depth, we'd have to get the Excel spreadsheet and share that with you, right?
Yeah. Not a lot I can do with PDF. So which subfolder did you say it was under? Was it under the April 2024?
Yeah, there's 2024-04, and in there, like there's a Next 10 Survey 2024 PDF, Node Next 10 Survey Results Overview and question.
Okay. Okay, I was in, there were two April 2024 subfolders. I was in the wrong one.
Oh, yes, you are right. Oh, well, yeah, one's 2023-04. Anyway, doesn't matter.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
But yeah, so like we have one PDF with, but yeah, not the right thing to really delve into. I don't think so.
And are you interested in summary, descriptive data, like visualizations?
I think we have like in terms of the like there's the second PDF. So the survey results have like charts and graphs and stuff like that. So I think like I'm not sure what we're interested in is the way I would put it, right? Like the way I can put it is we talked a bit about the survey at the Collaborator Summit. We're not necessarily researchers / survey experts. We put together a little list of questions. We got a bunch of interesting information. The second year we've done it, we get some interesting visualizations. We also get some nice write-in data. And I think Jacob was like, I see you're not experts. Maybe Zach can help add to, what you get out of this, right? So I'm not sure we know what we don't know, if you know what I mean. Like,
Hmm.
looked at the data or you looked at what we did and you said like, hey, well, I do this kind of stuff for a living. It'd be more effective if you do XYZ next time, or like, hey, here's something extra I pulled out of the data that you might not have realized, or like that's the kind of thing that I think that could make sense is more like if somebody were more, who knew more was gonna look at the data or run the survey the next time, recommendations along those lines would make sense to us.
Okay.
With the balance of we don't want to spend for, if you tell us something that's going to take us 100 times more work, we're probably not going to do this, right? Like we're sort of like we're doing this sort of as lightweight as we can. Let's put together some questions, throw them out there, and we actually got some pretty interesting results, right? So there,
Mhm.
anyway, just as the other sort of constraint that we work under. Does that make sense? So like, I think, a next step could be you could look at what's there and because it's got the questions and it's got like the filter data. And then you could say, well, yeah, can I get the Excel spreadsheet? I'll take a deeper look. Or like, well, based on what you did, there's not really going to be a way to get more, like based on your questions, we're not going to be able to get more out of it anyway. That kind of thing would make sense.
Mhm.
That makes sense?
Yeah,
So
just
sort
yeah, I haven't I've dug into it. Yeah, but just looking at the PDF, I might get a sense if there may be something like worth examining, if any like inferential statistics or insight I might be able to gain, maybe like some modeling.
okay. So I'd kind of say, yeah, if you want to take a look, possibly give us
Hmm.
some suggestions and or ask for the raw spreadsheet because we don't publish that because it has like IPs and some identifiable information and that kind of stuff. But like I think we could give it to you if you're like, hey, yeah, I'll take a deeper look, then we can get that over to you.
Sure. And how do you want me to convey my findings to you personally or over
I think like
uh,
in an
group?
issue, like unless you think there's something that isn't publicly consumable, we generally try and do everything GitHub. So like opening an issue
Yeah.
saying,
Okay.
out of the Collaborator Summit, I agreed to take another look at some of the data. Here's my thoughts, and we can have a good discussion there, async as well, and like people who can't attend the meetings can be involved, and then like we could put that on the agenda for a follow-up meeting to discuss as well.
Okay.
Thanks for being willing to
Okay.
take a look. It's always good to get as much as we can out of the data that we get. So
Yeah, no, thanks for looping me in. Yeah, I'm interested to dig in, and yeah, I'll look at it tonight, and I'll be in touch soon.
okay, thank you.
Hmm.
So I think Jacob, you had another topic as well you wanted to get on the agenda.
Yeah. So at the Collaborator Summit, I presented the possibility of introducing RFCs to mixed reception. And then funny enough, some of the people that um, were objecting were posting uh, basically the problems that the RFC thing solves. And we're kind of like lamenting them. And then I think it was Brian responded and he was like, this sounds like exactly what that RFC proposal addresses. So it seems like we all agree that these problems exist. Um, we're just yeah, not exactly aligned on how to address them. I'm not aware of another way that will have a similar effect. And yeah, to address these things that everyone agrees are real. Um, so should we try to push ahead with the RFC thing and um, do some kind of trial with it or something?
I think like a very first step, I think from what you just said that would be useful is like capturing, like let's document the problem. And then we can, if we have a well-documented problem, we can then say like, okay, what are the possible answers? Well, RFCs is one of the answers. Anybody else have any other answers? Like, that as a step may help along the path of like, it's like, okay, if we all like can easily look at the problems and they're just like, yeah, that's a real problem. And then it's like nobody else can come up with any other answers for how to address it. Maybe that helps in the receptiveness to the proposal, right? Like, or at least
Hmm.
it shows it as a build up step of like, well, here's all the problems. We think that this will address that. And
Well, it seemed like one of the reasons that people were objecting is because um, it takes away power that they don't want to give up.
right.
So I don't know how to address that unless, like, the thing that comes to mind is show them that like holding on to that power and letting the problem persist is more painful.
Right. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that one either, right? Like
Okay.
we as a project, it comes down, I think, in my mind, is the like the way the project runs, if you know what I mean. Like I'm not going to disagree with the RFC process at all, because like as you know, I tried to introduce one
Hmm.
many years ago, and like as an optional thing, it didn't really, as a hey, you can do this, it didn't, nobody
Hmm.
picked it up really. And I kind of agree that like unless there's some, I think it's always a good thing to do, right? Like basically having more explanation and it's something that describes what you're doing that you can reference back to and all that. That's going to help you, but it also is frustrating if you do all that and it doesn't help, right? And so I can see the point about like a proposal that says like if it goes through this, then it means that you can later not, it's already kind of agreed. But on the flip side, it's getting people to buy into that is exactly the challenge that you were talking about, right? And
Hmm.
so I think the proposal would need to be something that like it can't just be like, hey, two collaborators said yes and nobody else looked at it and it moves forward, right? Like you got to somehow force um more people to look at it and agree for it to be able to hold up on the later part of like, hey, no, you can't challenge it later on if you know.
Hmm. Well, yeah, like what I was thinking is you have to have at least one or two stakeholders from the things that it affects. So if it's, for instance, just loaders, then um, you have to have two people from the loaders team sign off. But if it also affects, um, I don't know, the larger modules thing, and then also affects workers and stuff like that, then you need someone from each. So that sort of expands the level of buy-in that you need to get when the surface area is larger.
Yeah, and I mean that almost requires like formalizing a little bit like some people, teams, whatever, have more input on things, right? Than which like I think we kind of informally have, but we don't necessarily have. So I guess where I would back up to is like if you're willing and have energy, I think like documenting the problem and saying like, well, what could we do to solve this problem? Whether RFCs will end up being the thing we go directly to, I don't know. But
Okay.
like the what you just talked about, like making it trying to get buy-in for like, hey, if for example on loaders, the loaders team gives its stamp of approval, then that means that there should be less whatever, like that might be a step towards that, right? Because then like a
Mhm.
loaders team could potentially approve the RFC and like at that point it has more I don't know what you want to call it, but so I could see, I guess what I'm trying to say is there might be some things we could do along the way that would end up like maybe in a long-term thing end up with because I don't like personally, I could be 100% wrong because like times change and whatever. Like I don't think if we just write up a here's how you do your RFC process, it's gonna be that easy to come up with something that actually works, right? But we might come up
Okay.
with some things that are actually very beneficial to the project that we can put in place that do help address those problems.
Okay. Sure. Yes, I can do.
So yeah, so like writing up something, writing probably PRing in somewhere um into the next 10 repos, something which is like, hey, here are the problems we're facing. And the universal things that everybody's going to say, yeah, we really need to fix that, right? And then we can,
Mhm.
kick off the discussion of on those, like, well, what do we do? RFCs is one option. Does any, are there any other options or intermediate steps or stuff like that?
Okay, cool. I shall do.
Um, yeah, and that's like all that's my 2 cents anyway. Like, other people might have other opinions, but I think that's at least a good start regardless of what happens.
And yeah, maybe we can actually leverage some of the stuff that Zach will look into, because I think the collaborator survey talked about specific things that make it painful. So if we can make it data driven and say like that all of the data that we have says that this sucks,
Yeah.
and instead of just like anecdotally.
Yep. Yeah, that's
Cool.
the other survey, right? So that's the one I pointed you to, Zach, the first time. It's a smaller survey, probably more like 30 people, but it's got like you know, what makes you want to contribute to contributing, not continue to contribute, that kind of stuff.
Hmm. We have about 30 active collaborators, right? Like people who are doing things like quite regularly.
There's like, yeah, I don't know. I haven't actually done the stats on that. Like we have something in the order of 80 people who are core collaborators. And this is also where it gets quite tricky, right? Because there's like people who contribute like in next 10, they're not necessarily core collaborators. So we have a whole bunch of different types of collaborators. The survey was like intended to hit the core collaborators, um, as opposed to everything, right? Because sometimes like the pain points, like in terms of the ones you're talking about that RFCs might address, are specific to the core
Mm,
versus necessarily affecting the teams, although a bunch of the teams then contribute stuff to core. So anyway, just wanted to say like we would have much more active collaborators if you look at the whole project, but like in just Node.js, like basically the Node.js/Node repo, there's like 80 people who are core collaborators, can land things, but your guesstimate of like 30 active people might be in the right ballpark. We got like 30 answers to the survey, so maybe that answers the
mm.
question.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because that's what I was thinking. If people are bothering to fill out this survey, these are probably the ones that are doing things.
Yeah, exactly. They're more likely, like if, yes, that, but there could be people who are like, well, surveys aren't my kind of thing or whatever. But
True, true, yes. Hopefully that's not too many.
yeah,
Um,
exactly. Like if you're really active, you'd think you would have filled out. So yeah, it's not a bad place to start in.
mm. A slight tangent. Um, so you were talking about how we have core collaborators, and then we have other people who may be really active in the project,
Yeah.
but are not necessarily contributing code to core. I think we talked about this a little bit at the Collab Summit. Um, yeah, potentially expanding the definition of collaborator to not just be core collaborator. Um, and then we might have like some kind of suffix. So like you're a collaborator, and then when it's relevant, of core. For instance, if like we bring on like, for instance, I don't know if Zach becomes super active and like he's telling us like, oh, we can definitively drop support for this thing because nobody is using it, and like that sort of thing, then I think it would make sense for that someone in that position to be called a collaborator because they are literally collaborating and like helping to drive the project. Um, is that something that we want to consider? Obviously, Zach is just starting today. That's just an
Yeah,
example,
yeah,
but
yeah. No, I know. Yeah, that's a long time discussion.
okay.
In that, like, unfortunately, and again, this comes down. I think even your other one, it comes down to people in groups. all that kind of stuff is really complicated, right? And so,
Mm.
you know, the people are collaborators in the different teams and they're documented in those teams, but like, for some reason, Node.js Node, or sorry, yeah, Node.js, no, and Node, I think, yeah, anyway. In there, we have a list of collaborators, which are like the core collaborators.
Mhm.
And that's kind of where everybody looks, I guess, for whatever reason, as the collaborator, like that's the core collaborator. But that list seems to be what people would like to be in. And over years, there's been times where like some people will advocate to say, well, like it doesn't really require you to be active in core. You can be really active in build, and that should get you in there,
Mm.
right? But then there'll be other people who are like, well, no, core collaborator is a very specific thing. It's only intended to be for people who need extra access. And so, like, by being a core collaborator, you get the ability to start and run CI jobs. You can land stuff. So basically, we're giving core collaborators that role because they will be able to do more in the project, right? So it's forget titles, forget people's desires, forget everything technically. You're
Mhm.
only a core collaborator if you need and you're doing the work that requires that access, and therefore we will give you the access. So you have those two things that are at play. Some
Mhm.
perspectives will be like, no, if you're not actually, and we have automation that'll be like, hey, if you're not doing things that require that access, you're going to be flagged, you're going to be removed, right? So,
Mhm.
um,
Well, like you can have sub teams. So what I'm thinking is we could have a superset of collaborators, and then underneath of collaborators, we can have another group called core, assign permissions based on those sort of like subgroups. So if you're going to do something in the node core thing, then those permissions are assigned to that subgroup. But then in terms of like having a voice and um, I guess sort of the word the badge, like it can be other people.
right. So that's where it gets like that's where it gets back to people and whatever. And so I think we've never figured that out over many years and had exactly those same desires. Like that's where like some people are like, no, these people, we should just make them a core collaborator, whatever. Forget the other technical aspect. Like we should just do it because it makes sense, right? And then other people are, no, 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 the very technical definition. So that would be I think a process of like trying to say, like, for social reasons we want to have this, like you're almost saying like we want to have the badge, right? And we want to make the badge so that the badge isn't just core people. And
Hmm.
how do we structure things, do things so that it reflects that, right? Because we kind of have it like we have multiple badges, right? Like you can have a badge for the next 10 because your name can show up on the next 10 repo, right? And you can have
Hmm.
it in, but that doesn't seem to quite, meet the what people would necessarily want, right? And
Yeah, because if you're not a collaborator, and you're on Next 10, then you're basically like an adjunct member or like a guest. So then, like one of the other things that we talked about at the Collab Summit was sort of like an in crowd and an out crowd and like an us versus them kind of thing. So like, um, yeah, if you're a guest member, then you have like half a vote. Not literally, but like your vote is
yeah,
not quite the same.
well, and that would, so I that will, I'm sure that would get into like a whole discussion, right? Because like if somebody's regularly contributing code and now like should somebody who doesn't contribute or edit that code have the exact same, it's almost back to your saying, on the flip side, you're like, hey, well, like the team should actually potentially have more
Mm.
say over the people who may be contributing now. It's kind of like, oh, but people who are not as involved should have an equal say. And like, yeah, it's super complicated, I think is the
Oh, that's not to get political, but that's kind of like America. Like, I'm completely uninformed, but my
Yeah.
opinion is still as valid as like the expert. So like,
Yeah,
like
yeah, no,
I
I
think the
know,
people,
right? So like
yeah,
that's where, but so yeah. Um, and like part of our complaint is that like I'm just throwing out these different things, right? Like on the PRs, it's
hmm
almost like on the one discussion is like, well, we got to narrow the people who can who like can complain, right? Like it's
yes,
almost like, maybe you're not saying that, but you're saying like unless you complained earlier, you can't complain. But it's almost kind of a similar because not everybody is going to look early, right? Or has the capability to look early. And part of the complaint today is like somebody at the last minute who hasn't been involved, doesn't know what's going on, gets in and says, well, shouldn't you name it this instead? And like the
yes.
person's like already exhausted, and it's like, well, and like trying to, bike shedding is like impossible, and the more people you get involved, the more it explodes. And anyway,
Mm,
yeah. So I mean, I'll say like there's an unsettled issue that definitely the project could be better with if we could figure out how to make that work better.
mm.
But it's not
Like,
going to be a simple process. Is sort of where I'm.
I think we formerly had something like working groups, and working groups, I think, might be the thing that I'm thinking of, where they're sort of like blessed to have the ownership of the thing. So like, if something is going to happen, like it sort of needs to have their assent. So
We do
maybe,
still have that concept, and like
okay.
we just have trended towards doing teams as opposed to working groups because working groups are like heavier overhead. The thing that sometimes like so that like the build team is still a working group, right? And
Mhm,
they do have like as a team more sort of like delegated power. So the
mhm,
and but um so yeah, so like in cases where there's an active team that's really is driving the work, actually having the working group chartered. Um, but I know like even the security working group was dechartered into a team because, anyway, for reasons
I,
also.
okay. That sounds like a little bit messy. I don't know why, but yeah,
So
like,
so I'll
but
say
good.
that is something we could definitely improve on.
Hmm
I don't know how to make like so if you have some really good ideas, they're worth
hmm
discussing, but I'm just sort of giving you the heads up. I think it's going to be messy, but
Yes, like, I don't think we should be able to use this process to really be like a dick, but I think like the people who work on something every day, they should be able to like mostly say this is okay, and then someone else can come in and say like, did you consider this? And then like we are all collaborators, so yes, we should consider that. And then they can say like, okay, so that is maybe a problem, but tomorrow kind of thing. And then like if someone really wants to push it, then there should be some kind of process for that. But um, unless not, then I think that group should be generally blessed enough to say like, we're going to move forward. Thank you.
thank you for your input. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I
But
think
like if
like
the group is just like constantly doing that,
yeah.
then maybe we have a problem, and then maybe that should get reviewed. But if it's like yeah, as you say, like they're avoiding some bike shedding or something, that's like a legitimate use of thank you, but not now.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, it could even be like if we go back to those core problems, right? Like
Hmm
I could see smaller things, smaller proposals that say like, can we somehow limit the feedback to like beyond a certain point, you know, a suggestion for a new name, if it resonates, maybe it makes sense, but if it doesn't, we would like to avoid a massive bike shed over that, right? Where
Yeah,
somebody says, hey, here's a fundamental flaw, then,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, right? So, the dispute process today is pretty simple, I guess, and maybe that's like, you know, any collaborator can object. And
Mhm.
unless they agree, it gets escalated to the TSC, which is a slow and, a slow process because now you've got to get some new people involved. They got to get up to speed. Do they
Mhm.
all agree? And then, you know what I mean? Right. So like another step. Yeah, I don't know. Like, a step where the working group would then make a decision versus the going direct to the TSC. Maybe that would make a decision faster or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's always the appeal to the TSC if
Yeah.
no, everyone's unhappy.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, so those are all like, especially coming out of like, we know we've got some real pain points. If we can discuss those pain points and talk about like these different options of what we can do,
Hmm.
that is that is things that I think we should talk about in this particular group as a
Okay, cool.
starting point. We obviously like, this doesn't tend to be a huge group, so like whatever we come up with are basically ideas to try and then share with the larger collaborator base as a way forward, right? But as a place to start to discuss them and come up with a proposal, it's the right place, I think.
Okay, cool. I'll get these documented. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, no problem. And any other topics before we close out for today?
I just realized everyone on this call is Canadian.
Surprisingly, we
Oh.
have a lot of Canadians. Well, we're not away for Thanksgiving for one.
Yes.
But there are quite a few Canadians in the Node project. I'm always surprised that, like, when I find out, oh, you're a Canadian, I'm Canadian too, right? So
Yes, indeed.
yeah, we have an outsized involvement, I think, for some.
Okay, well, I think that's everything.
Okay. Well, thanks.
Cool.
Nice talking to you, and
Thanks.
thanks
Yeah,
for
nice
getting
meeting
involved.
you.
We'll see you all again soon.
Thank
Okay.
you. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.